We are back, a gentleman that I have read and been interested to meet. Now I have an excuse, and you all do too. Welcome, Josh Summers.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
All right, the main subject of today is going to be one of my favorite places in the world. We're also going to touch on online security and a whole lot of other stuff. So I'm very excited for this one. And the centerpiece is Xinjiang province, China. Giant landmass, mix of cultures. How do you give somebody a concept? I think I was reading what 4 times the size of Japan in land area. It's
Oh yeah,
superlatives.
it really is, and it's funny the fact that a place so large generally is a blank spot in most people's mind maps. They wouldn't even know where it's located. So if you know where Tibet is, then Xinjiang is just right north of that. I know a lot of people call China, like the map of China is like a chicken, right? And you got Beijing kind of as the head, and Xinjiang would be the tail feathers, is what the locals in Xinjiang, or at least the Chinese locals would say, Mandarin or the local Chinese there. It is it is bigger than Texas and California combined. If
Hmm.
you're a U.S. resident, if you're from the EU, it's like, I think I remember I did the math. It was like France, Germany, and Spain, and maybe one more, and it's bigger than all three of those. It's one of those places where I remember at one point it took me a full 24 hours on a bus to get from the east side all the way to the west corner, and it's that big.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe Kazakhstan comes into mind, but the kebabs are juicier in Xinjiang. So I was spoiled first in Xinjiang, and every other kebab I think is dry in comparison in the world.
Yeah. So you went to, when did you go to Xinjiang?
I was trying to think the year of my first trip was probably 2001.
Oh,
And
wow. Okay.
so I studied in Shanghai in 1999, and then
Yep.
back studied in Hong Kong in 2001, and then intervening years traveled every province of China and lived in China until 2010. And so I've been to every province. Xinjiang,
Yeah.
there's a number of I haven't been in the north. And I haven't been in the Ely Valley, so there's a lot I haven't seen. But I
Yeah.
always talk it up as this incredible destination.
Oh, yeah.
I would be going back more if, as you said, the distance and time is an incredible one.
It is. I mean, they've really built up their airport infrastructure and trains. So now there's high-speed trains that go into Urumqi, which is the capital city, and then from there, one of my favorite spots is Turpan.
Mhm.
And that used to be, good. I remember when I first arrived in 2006. That used to be, a good 3 hour, 2 to 3 hour bus ride or train
Mhm.
ride, and now you can get there in like 45 minutes. And
Oh
I mean,
wow.
it's a
Yeah.
beautiful train view and everything. But yeah, I mean, if you were back there in 2001, the kebabs were probably one kwai each, because that's what they were when
Mhm.
I first arrived in 2006, where you could just get this stick of, and the way it is it's just like meat, fat, meat, fat, meat, fat,
Mhm.
the way that kebabs are. And I remember first arriving thinking, oh, this fat is just disgusting. I can't believe I'm eating straight fat. And by the end of our time in Xinjiang, like, it was my favorite part. Like, it's the most flavorful, juiciest part. But you also have to keep in mind, if you were to go to Xinjiang right now, one kebab costs anywhere between 5 and 20 kwai,
Mhm.
just because of, I mean, a lot of different reasons. But I mean, obviously, you've got, just everything kind of increasing in price. But yeah, it's a little bit harder to just go get. Like, I remember we would get a plate of like 20, 30, 40 kebabs as a, with a group of friends, and we'd all just eat as many kebabs as we could have.
Yeah. I'm missing that. Actually, one of the best meals I've ever had was just like Dawn getting off a train. I think like in Kucha, and so I
Yep.
know the Mandarin names for a lot of places, not the Uyghur names, and
That's all right.
having the roast dumplings, which are filled with the lamb and the lemon, and
Yeah.
I think there was something bad because I got really sick there later in the day, but I still love the taste of them, and even that. So to talk
Yeah.
about the foods and the culture, I mean, so you pointed out that there is ethnic Han Chinese that are more recent to the region, you could say, and then
Right.
Uyghurs. What are the Uyghurs? It would be one one starting point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that I've heard people say before, and having lived there, it's harder for me to experience this, but I know it's true, is when you land in Xinjiang, it almost feels like you're in a different country. Like it's hard to believe that you're in China. Now, Urumqi, there are parts of it that are definitely Chinese. Like it is Chinese all the way. But once you get outside of that main capital city, it all just feels a little more Central Asian. So if you've traveled around Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, it feels a little more familiar. And the Uyghur people are more related to those people groups, probably more Turkey than anything else. Turkey, Uzbekistan is where they feel a lot of kinship with those peoples than they do with the Han Chinese. And the only you've got those two opposing groups where you got an opposing. I mean, obviously there's a lot of political opposition, but I just mean from a cultural standpoint, these two opposing groups where you've got the Han Chinese, which are what you would consider a Chinese person when most Westerners think of Chinese, and then you've got the Uyghur Chinese, which look very much Central Asian, and then in the middle you've got this group called the Hui, which are another minority group that are actually what we would call, the best description would be Chinese Muslims.
Mhm.
So they look Chinese, but they have kind of the belief system that is similar to the Uyghur, and those would kind of round out the majority of the people that you're going to run into in Xinjiang. I mean, there's also Kazakh, there's Mongol, there's Russian groups, but those are pretty small pockets. I'd say that those three groups I just mentioned, the Han Chinese, the Uyghur, and the Hui are the majority. And the Uyghur are a Muslim people that what would I mean their primary cuisine would be obviously lamb based and a lot of noodles. They love noodles, and again, similar to some of the stuff you might find in regions nearby like Gansu or Qinghai or something like that. That idea of slapping the noodles and stretching them is, I mean, some of the restaurants are just so much fun to go in and try the different foods. So, I mean, if you were making a list of the foods that you had to have while you were there, you'd need to have Uyghur polo, which is this kind of like a rice pilaf dish that you would get in the rest of Central Asia, but it's uniquely Uyghur, and it has lamb cubes, or there's some where it's just like this chunk of lamb that they just have roasted and they lay on top of it. There's what I would call lagman in Uyghur, and it's like this noodle dish with just a bunch of vegetables and tomato sauce type of thing poured over it. It is just absolutely delicious. Of course, you got your kebabs, and then a number of other those, just like there's one called ding ding, which is just little chopped up noodles, which is a lot of fun. But yeah, all of those are just a good representation of the type of food that you would find. It's not like if you're on a health kick, Xinjiang is really one of the last places you want to go, because yeah, I mean, lamb meat is not a lean meat by any stretch of the imagination, and noodles are not they can sit heavy at times, especially with all the oil.
So I'd say with that mixing of cultures, you're going to find more vegetable options there than probably anywhere else on the Silk Road until maybe you get to Istanbul, I would think.
Yeah, and I think that was one thing that I really enjoy about. That is one thing I really enjoy about Xinjiang is because you have that mix of cultures. It was difficult for me to get bored. Sometimes, if it's just Chinese food or if it's just one type of food, not that that can get boring too fast, but I liked the fact that, my family, my wife and I could decide, all right, tonight we're gonna have Chinese. We just feel like a rice dish, we feel like a stir fry or something like that. Versus, all right, no, let's actually go, let's sit outside, let's have, a barbecue, a kebab and some kvass and all of that stuff. And it made for just a variety that kept on keeping us interested and engaged with the cultures.
And speak to the fruits of the region.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about that, and it happens. It's funny because there's different parts of the region that are good for different kinds of fruits, and one of the reasons is because it's so large, it has so many different um, I guess just climates. So you've got a huge desert in the south, the Taklamakan Desert. You've got mountains that are going through the, on the west side, through the center, around the northern tip, and then you've got just kind of these plains, these high plains of Ely. And so each of those are good for different types of fruits. So you've got grapes from Turpan, which are just these. I mean, they've always been known, even throughout history, for their grapes and specifically their raisins. They would export their raisins everywhere, and people loved the Turpin raisins. And even now, going into Turpin, it boggles my mind when I go and look at like like just a vendor selling like 20 different kinds of raisins. And I think to myself, I didn't know there were 20 different kinds. I thought there was just raisins, but no, there are so many different kinds of raisins that you can actually have. And so, yeah, like you've got that, you've got the Korla pears, you've got the Ely apples, melons, watermelons, pomegranates from Kashgar. The pomegranates there are incredible. Same with the figs. I never knew I liked figs so much until I had a lot of those.
If you haven't had fresh figs before, I mean, I mean, even in the US now, you'll see them at Costco. They come from your home state, right? Texas usually is when
Yeah,
they appear. So a fresh fig is, yeah, I wasn't big on dry figs, but
yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, I had never had a fresh fig. I, this will tell you, I grew up on fig Newtons. Like that's what I knew about figs. That was the best, that was the most that I knew. So even seeing it, like this yellow kind of flattish, fruit, I didn't quite even know what I was looking at first. But yeah, I think that covers most of the fruits because but it is, you'll go to any open market and it's just these colorful fruits just all as far as you can see, and they are incredibly ripe. One of the things though I will say, you cannot, like, there are certain fruits you cannot find. Fruits like blueberries are really difficult to find. Strawberries come in season, you'll get strawberries seasonally. But avocados was one that I was really bummed. Like you said, I'm from Texas, and so like this idea of having some guacamole every once in a while on some homemade Mexican, Tex-Mex stuff, but there were no avocados, not at all.
so we've set the stage a bit, and there's the political questions are one that any responsible traveler can't avoid. And Andy
Sure.
in the comments is phrasing it this way: what would you say is the major impact of the recent security situation, increased police presence, etc., on foreign travelers in Xinjiang? Also, which places would you say have best or worst survived the ongoing Sinification, e.g., old city of Kashgar?
Yeah. Yeah, those are interesting questions. And I would start by saying that recent security situation, I would believe, is a misnomer. The security situation has been something that's been happening for the past, more than a decade. When I arrived in 2006, there was security, not to the same degree as maybe the rest of China, but I got to watch as things kind of ratcheted up very slowly. And obviously 2009, if you're familiar with Xinjiang history, was a very pivotal time in kind of that security situation. And that's when things really started to change. And I saw noticeable differences, whether it was, checkpoints, whether it was just, a lot more fencing off. I used to be able to go in and out of my apartment complex from different places, but now there's just this one place. And now you've got to scan in order to get in. You got to scan either your ID card or, if I'm known as a resident, obviously the security guard would let me in. But yeah, so for the past 10 years, it's really been a lot more of an annoyance than it has been a major impact on travel. Now, I would say it's been a major impact for those people that want to get way off the beaten path. Generally speaking, in China, anywhere, and even in Xinjiang, if you're willing to stay on the beaten path, you're not going to have too many troubles. Like if you just want to go see the major sites, if you want to see them, at the normal time of day, it's like, if you're kind of just going along the path, especially if you're going with a tour group, goodness, you're fine. What the trouble is when people ask me, they say, hey, can we go out, hiking in the mountains near Kashgar, or can we go hiking out in the can we stay in a yurt near the Karakul Lake on the border with Tajikistan, or can we go, you name it. And it's like, well, that's where you get into some tricky situations, because as annoying as the checkpoints are, they do know it allows them to know where you're at. And I've had them track me down and basically say, I've had to knock on my hotel door, and they'll say, 1 a.m. They don't care what time, and they'll say, you're not in an approved foreigner hotel. There's, according to Chinese law, I think it's law or maybe it's policy in our area, I'm not entirely sure. You have to stay in a
law is a
yeah, exactly.
fuzzy thing. Yeah.
Yeah, a foreigner needs to stay in a 3-star hotel or higher, which throughout most of China, that's not a big deal. In Xinjiang, it's a little bit harder. It's like in a small Xinjiang town, you might have one hotel that fits that bill. And I'm talking about small, little villages or towns. And in that hotel, it either just isn't where I want it to be, or it's more expensive than I want it. So I'll just go and find a hotel that's, 100 kwai or something like that, just something really, really cheap, and go in there. And, it's about a 50-50 chance that I would be able to stay there. Most of the time they would just say, no, we're not allowed to have foreigners. But the ones that I could get to actually do it, it's then a 50-50 chance whether I'd get a knock on the door at 1 a.m. And they would, it wouldn't be that bad. The instances where that's happened, they actually just escort me to the hotel that I'm allowed to be at, and then check me in there. So I paid for 2 hotels, one cheap and one expensive, and I've had a not great night of sleep, but it's not the end of the world. What really bugs me, and this is where the major impact of the question kind of comes into play, is that it's like you're saying, the difference between a law and a regulation. There's a lot in China that's just, it's up to interpretation, is what it seems to be. And so you read, or let's say you even read my book, this place over here, these Bayou grasslands are amazing, you really need to go see those. So you plan your trip, and this has happened to a number of people that I've helped, with their trip going up to Xinjiang. They plan their trip, they are getting all excited, and then they get to a checkpoint, and for some reason they just don't let them through. They say, and it could be a number of things. It could be just the particular officer doesn't like you, they're having a bad day. Maybe there was some incident that happened that's never going to make the news, and they're just closing off that area for no reason, or for that reason. And so it really, the thing that I tell people that are traveling out to that region is, you have to travel with the most flexible schedule that you've ever had in your life, because you never know, what you will or won't be allowed to do, how long it's going to take you to get to those places, and just that long way you can enjoy the journey, and the fact that you're getting to see some of these things despite all of those impacts that security has. And that's it. I'm the proverbial frog in a boiling pot. It was hard it's harder for me because I lived through the ratcheting up. But I think for somebody that's used to traveling freely in the rest of the world, or even in China, you're gonna feel constricted. You're gonna feel restricted when you start going around Xinjiang nowadays. And as long as you can go in knowing that, it won't have as much of an impact on your travels as it would if you were just kind of blindly ignorant about it.
Knowing it is one thing, but also preparing yourself to react calmly. As early 2000s, and not just Xinjiang, but traveling around places in Gansu, different places, even Anhui. I remember when some of those villages that were in Crouching Tiger became UNESCO sites. I went out there, and they wouldn't let me in. And they said it's an internal regulation, Neibu Guiding. That can mean anything. You have to go to the county seat to get a permit, which is like 30 kilometers away, because there's military nearby. And I said, your country just put these as UNESCO sites. They advertise at the highest levels that you're opening up these villages. And and that was like, in that case, the risks were pretty low. And there were some locals that were down the corner, like, here, come in this way for half the price, but I wouldn't mess around in the situation with, but yeah, I remember in the middle of the night, like on trains, even in Gansu province, an official pulling out even on a train and saying like, you're not getting off at this stop. And this was 15, 20 years ago. And it's, if you react
Mm,
badly to it, you're not,
yeah,
it's not going to get better. It's,
no,
and,
no. Yeah, I completely agree. And to answer quickly the second point of that question, because there is a lot that hasn't survived well, what he's calling the Sinification, or just the Chineseification. It's the Kashgar Old City is not one of them, unfortunately. It's been completely redone. That's one of the reasons why I like Turpan so much. I feel like Turpan is just if you can get outside the really center core of the city and just kind of explore outside of it, there's just some beautiful, just authentically Uyghur, you could almost feel like you're stepping back, 50, 60 years in time, just walking around parts of Turpan. And a lot of the villages outside of town are harder to get into. But, like say you're going to go see the ancient city of Gaochang, which is about 30, 45 minutes southeast of Turpan. If you can get your driver to stop at some of the, villages on the way there, and there are some, even if they say there aren't, but there are some, and I think you just walking around, experiencing some of the locals. I mean, it's not like there's much to do. You're not going to find a restaurant really, and you're not going to find anything. I don't know. It's just worth experiencing more than anything else.
yeah, let's focus on Turpan because that's that. I'm glad you keep mentioning it. It validates when I recommended to people that if they want the Chinese Silk Road experience, of course they're going to start in Xi'an. Sometimes I convince
Yeah.
them to divert to Ningxia, but that takes a sales pitch. But then I say absolutely of all the incredible places, Dunhuang, the Mogaoku, the grottos at Dunhuang, of course, and then Turpan is just, you mentioned the Gaocheng ruins, the Jiahe ruins, the Huoyan Mountains, Great Valley. It just
Yeah.
seems like there's so much there. So talk to it as a destination.
Yeah, I think part of the draw of the destination is just that it still retains a lot of that Uyghur culture to it. Kashgar's lost a lot of that. It's turned into more of a Chinese tourist destination. And so, there's just, it's, I've learned that there's a big difference between what a Western tourist wants and what a Chinese tourist wants. And if you want to understand what that difference is, go to Kashgar and walk around, and you'll feel the difference. But Turpin hasn't quite got there yet. I mean, there's a lot of change that's happening, but there's still a lot of those grape trellises, and the irony of Turpin is the best time to go is also the worst time to go. So the best time to go is in the summer, but that's also the worst time to go because it's blazing hot, like seriously super duper hot. And I say it's the best time to go just because being able to see the grape trellises and all of that, and they've got their grape festival that happens in August, September. It just really is a kind of a time when the place comes alive. I mean, it shuts down for the middle of the day, so there's like almost like a Mexican siesta that happens in the middle of the day, but it's still, you can walk around, and there's plenty of people that will interact with you, and it feels very, like I said, authentic. And so, like you said, there's a lot of history there. You've got the Jiaohe ruins, you've got the Gaochang ruins, you've got even some of the caves that happen that you'll find in north of Turpan, where a lot of some of the Buddhists that came through there would dig out these caves and paint in them. And then you've got even the modern history of some of the Western explorers that came through and tried to preserve some of those, and are now considered, persona non grata. We don't like, these people in terms of Chinese history, because they stole, a lot of the paintings out of these caves and brought them to the British Museum and all these other places. But still, just being able to see that, right? Walk into a cave and see where they literally carved out this person, and now it's sitting in a museum, on the other side of the world. Or getting to, just walk through what used to be the government offices of Jiaohe, which was active back in, over 1,500 years ago. Like, it's just it's fascinating that it's been preserved. And to even imagine, for me, that was a city that was actually built, that was built down. And what I mean by that is obviously most cities we build up. We start from the ground and we build up. but Jiaohe is one of the few cities I've ever seen that was actually built down. So they dug down in. And so you go down into the, I mean, and part of it is because, you know, it's so hot out there that they want to be, you know, down inside these cave-like places that are much cooler. But doing that, and then I think even from an ecological standpoint, you know, you can go to, you know, just jump on a train for less than 30 minutes and go to a place called Shanshan, where you can go up into the sand dunes and you know, ride a camel in the sand dunes. And I've been to a point, I've actually camped up there, like set up a tent and went into far enough into a sand dune where you just look around and it looks like you're just in the middle of sand. It was I mean, it was so much fun. I mean, it was hot. Like I remember we told the camel guy, he left, he went back home, we stayed the night. We were like, you got to be here by like 8 a.m. because we got to get down and out of here. And he's like, yeah. I'll be here. 8 a.m. came and we couldn't find him. And in like, it was starting to burn. Like I can't imagine the explorers that used to take camels across the desert, because for me, you know, and I don't consider myself like, you know, some mountain man or anything, but by 8:15, I was about ready to, like, you know, I don't know what I was about ready to do, but I was so thirsty. I was so hot. And finally we see the guy coming up, and we had packed everything, and we jetted down the sand dunes to find him and get on those camels to get out. But that was fun. I mean, and so from that end, and then you've got, you know, some mountains. I mean, like you were saying, you've got what are known as the Flaming Mountains, which are just these really pretty, especially at kind of dusk or sunrise, pretty mountains that were part of just, yeah, that landscape. And so I think that's part of what the allure of Turpin is, not just the culture, not just the history, but even just all of the things that are, you know, from the green grape vineyards to the desert. It feels like these contrasts that are so much fun.
Fantastic. And that's the more traveled and more connected, we could call the Northern Silk Road route along the north of the Taklamakan Desert. I've not been at all on what the so-called southern route south of the desert through Hotan. Can you speak to that as a travel route?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult travel route, just because it's not a high tourist part of the region, and so even for Chinese. So a lot of the northern Xinjiang is built up mostly for the Chinese tourists, and then the northern south route, which you're talking about, that goes through Kucha and through Kashgar, that's been built up most for the Western tourists, although it's slowly making its way into the Chinese tourists. But that southern route, I remember last time I went through there, one of my favorite things to go visit was like there's just like these old crafts, parts of the culture, right? So Uyghur, there used to be
that Hotan is famous for the knives.
Yeah. Well, no, there's one called Yengasar, which yeah. So let me see if I can even make this clear here. So this is like a Yengasar knife, and what makes them unique, and you probably can't even really see it that well, but like they stamp in there, you know, not just that it's from Yengasar, but they stamp in the family name of the family that made it. And then part of what makes it so unique are these handles. They're able to take and just make these very ornate handles that made from bone or like all sorts of different stuff from that region. And I went.
Right? I always forget which product is the local. Yeah.
Well, and so Hotan's actually got a few things. They've got jade. They've got carpets. The Hotan Atlas is really popular as well. Atlas is this pattern of I guess, what would you call it? Just like cloth or clothing that they would have that's very much associated with the Uyghur people. And then one of the other things that they have is paper. They actually did homemade paper from, you know, just tree bark. And I remember going out there. I did a video on it because I was so fascinated by it. And he would just, it was a family ordeal where they would strip the bark, they would boil the bark, they would pound the bark, and then they'd lay it out, and then that would be their paper. And so but it's not like all of this is prepackaged into this really nice and easy, hey, this is how you go see it. Here's, a tour that stops you off at all these 5 places. Hotan might have that a little bit, but not much. It's going to be a lot harder to find that. And so the beauty of it is that you've got to go and kind of explore and find it yourself. Like I literally had to go knocking on doors to find this guy who did the paper. And that was what was fun about it is, like driving with a taxi driver who all I knew was the village name. And so he drove me to the village, and then we just would stick our head out the window, me and a friend of mine, and just be like, we've heard about this paper. Where's this paper? And I'd be like, just down that road, and so you just keep driving until you find it. And that was great. I love that kind of travel. To me, that's a lot of fun because I know not too many people have been here. Not too many people are willing to go through the effort that I just went through to find that stuff.
And Kevin's asking, in 2009, he went Kashgar, Hetian, Ruoqiang, Shimianhuang to Golmud in Qinghai, and he provided an update to the Lonely Planet author at the time. He said roads were not paved in the Far East then, but there was no foreigner restriction that he experienced. Are there changes to the roads and the restrictions since?
Yeah, the roads have definitely changed. Unfortunately, like it's off and on. So like from where is it? I'm drawing a blank on the name of the city now all of a sudden. Anyway, there's a point from Turpin on the way to Kucha. What is the name of that city? Anyway, where you go south into Ruoqiang, and from there, there have been times during my 10 years in Xinjiang when that road's been open, and then there are times when that hasn't been open. And so it seems to go back and forth. Now the roads are great, yeah. I mean, there's especially since 2009, and unfortunately, the reason for that isn't always the greatest. Like one of the reasons why they've made a lot of the transportation easier to those regions is because they needed a way to get military to different parts of the region faster. And they realized that in 2009 when it took them days to get military to different parts of the region. And so for that same, I mean, since 2009, the train that went from Turpan to Kashgar has now been extended to Hotan, and they're working to extend that out even further so that there will be 2 exits, domestic exits out of Xinjiang. So you've got one that goes out into Gansu province, and they're doing another one that's going to go out into Qinghai province. I'm not sure, that's been in progress for a while now, and so I'm not sure how long, but eventually the Taklamakan is just going to be circled by train.
I see.
It's already got highway, very nice highway that goes around, and you even have 2 highways that go straight through the Taklamakan Desert. But now you've got trains that are going on beyond that. So technically it's getting easier to go between those areas, but at the same time, that southern route is so highly sensitive that as a foreign traveler, it would still be extremely hard to make it to Minfeng or Ruoqiang or any of these other kind of along the southeast corner of the Taklamakan Desert.
And how about the Ely Valley? I had a professor American anthropologist who spent a few years living there. The pictures are idyllic and a bit different. It's not the desert scenery that we've been discussing.
Yeah. I mean, Ely's it's one of the few parts of Xinjiang that kind of has its own identity. It used to be, it kind of revolted and separated out in the early 1900s to be its own country for a short little while. And it's, it's kind of, in that way, it is somewhat set apart. Geographically, it's set apart. You've got just these high plains and mountains. It's kind of on the south side, it's got the Tian Shan Mountains. And then obviously bordering up against the Central Asian countries. So it's a fun place. Excuse me. I enjoy Ely for everything surrounding it. Like the city itself, a lot of the history there has kind of, I think because it's not something that China once remembered much. So a lot of that history has been torn down, squashed. Like there's a little bit, that you can find, but not much. Whereas just going up into a lot of these grasslands and seeing, especially during there's like these apricot blossoms that come out in April, or even just the grasslands during the springtime. Going up there, staying in a yurt if possible, and really enjoying that part of the culture, which is very nomadic, right? That part of the country, it used to be a lot more nomadic than it is now. And you'd have the nomads that would come in with their yurts and their flocks, and they would just settle in a place for a while and then move. And that it was just an amazing part of Xinjiang.
Fantastic. And you mentioned earlier the far north as being more developed in recent years for Chinese tourism. Would that be
Yeah.
broadly Altai might be one that you would be in a neighboring country than picking that out as the destination?
Well, I think the reason why I rarely offer that as a destination of interest for most Western travelers is because there's nothing there that you can't see in another country, right?
Mm.
Like you can go to Switzerland and see something just as good, if not better, in my opinion, as the lake and the rivers and the mountains that are there. And same even in the US, whether it's the Appalachian Mountains or any of the mountain ranges out there. It's there. It's not like there's a whole lot of culture. There is, like there is Uyghur culture, and there's a difference, strangely, between North Uyghur culture and South Uyghur culture, and they don't necessarily like each other as much.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very very small, right? And you also have groups of Mongolians. You've got these other small groups of minorities that are pockets, but like the Tuvan people that have been, at least China seems to push them as the first people to have invented snow skiing.
Mm.
And there's a lot of skiing that happens up in the north. So it's one of those places, but it's hard to go and really experience that culture like you can the Uyghur culture in Turpan, or even the Kazakh culture in Ili, something like that. So the culture and the history just isn't quite as apparent. And so really all you're doing if you go up to the north, in my opinion, and if you live there, it's worth the time. But I mean, is you're going to see scenery. You're going to see mountains and lakes and rivers. And it's beautiful. It's gorgeous, but it's not something you can't see in another part of the world. And that's one of the reasons why I'm not just jumping into recommending that to most people.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's, I guess, been my assumption. So I haven't tested it out, but it's good to hear that validated. Now, how many years do you live in Xinjiang?
10 years.
10 years. And uh, the way I was thinking of asking it is what's it like to live in a terribly inappropriate time zone? And by that,
Yeah.
I know that, everything's Beijing time, and I know that a
Yeah.
lot of things time shift, but like then the college entrance exam is effectively at like 5 in the morning for these kids. So there's quirks about being in the same time zone as Beijing that far away.
Yeah, yeah. It kind of brings to mind, I don't know if you knew this, but like all of this year, because everybody's been going online all around the world, all of the PSAT, no, all these tests, major tests for high school students.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm here in Asia still right now, and so everybody, all students that I knew, had to wake up at like 1 a.m. or stay awake until 1 a.m. to take these tests because they gave them all at the same time.
Okay.
Did you hear about that?
No, I wasn't following, but makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so they only wanted to give it once for some reason, and so everybody around the world had to take it at the same time. So a lot of the students here were just waking up at odd hours just to take this test. And I think it's kind of a similar thing where for stuff that is based on Beijing time, it's inconvenient.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is that everything else kind of moves with the sun.
Mm.
So, I would wake up, in the winter months at 9 a.m. because really that's 7 a.m. Beijing time. But the sun, for me, 7 a.m. would actually be what my clock says is 9 a.m. And then school doesn't start until 10 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't go to work until 10 a.m. But then it gets off at 7 p.m. So really, we just shifted everything 2 hours and lived our life 2 hours ahead. I have lunch at 2 o'clock, dinner at 8 o'clock. Like all of those things, it's just that's what got ingrained in everybody's head. The only and most annoying part was just when you would go to meet with somebody, it always was followed. It's like if you wanted to meet with me, it's like, oh, you want to meet at for coffee? Yeah. How about 11 a.m.? Sure. And then the next question,
Yeah.
every time, Xinjiang time or local time? Oh, that's local time. Oh, okay, good. I got to make note of that because I would have done Beijing time, and I said Xinjiang time. I meant Beijing time or local time. And because the difference is 2 hours, and I'd actually arrived at a meeting 2 hours early once. You don't do that twice.
That's true. You don't go far away from a Beijing Shijian announcement somewhere. So.
Exactly.
That a lot of people in our group have had different experiences living in other countries, and they're from countries around the world. What did a decade in Xinjiang, this country-sized province, teach you about another country-sized state, your home state of Texas?
Oh, wow. I mean, there's a lot of similarities. Like both Xinjiang and Texas kind of are run on oil. There's a lot of dead space, like geographically in both of those regions. There's parts of Texas that just nothing. In Xinjiang, there's a lot of just desolate area. But I think things that I learned about, I don't know what I'd say about that. It was, yeah, I mean, I learned to appreciate desolation, and I know that sounds weird, but I remember first arriving in Xinjiang, and I remember at the time where I was going out to a place called Cherami, which was an oil city up in the northwest that was close to the border with Kazakhstan. And at the time, I feel like 5 hour bus journey on roads that weren't the greatest. And I remember just being like, oh my gosh, we are out in the middle of nowhere. This is so far, so like there's nothing here, because we would just drive, and all of a sudden the city popped. Literally was in the middle, like it was there because of oil. They had to dig out channels to bring water to the city because there was no way that a city was going to actually survive in that location. I learned to appreciate that isolation a little bit, and kind of seeing something come to life in the middle of what there is to life. Just seeing the desert, or seeing of any sort of animals or anything outside of that one little area. I don't know. There's something about that I really liked.
Your connection seems to be dropping a little bit. I don't know if there's something you could tweak just the past minute or so. The counter went from very green to very red on the connection health monitor. So well, it might be back now. I think we got most of that answer, and partly why I asked it was it seems that because of this the current health situation, and as well as the political issues in the U.S., that whereas in China, I think everybody has a very clear idea of each province and the people, and it can go into stereotypes, but there's very clear ideas of the identities of different places, and I feel like a lot of us Americans are learning about the rest of our country for the first time, and in a little bit more depth than we've ever engaged.
Yeah, I see where you're headed with that, and hopefully, I don't know why I can't get better. I'm on the
fast. It looks good now. It looks perfect now. It bumped right back up.
Okay.
So I think everybody in Thailand just logged in for work at the same time. It looks good.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of stereotypes from even from within China. So one of the things that I would experience, because within China, I've only lived in Xinjiang. I haven't spent time in Beijing. I've traveled through all of these places, but I've never lived in any of these other places. And so traveling through, and I remember shopping in Beijing and trying to negotiate with somebody. And this is probably back in 2009 or 10 or something like that. So it was a little while ago, but I remember negotiating in like the Silk Road Market or something like that, or the Silk Market or whatever it is in Beijing. And trying to get it down there, like, this is, the way that they always negotiate. We can't go to that price. And I thought about it, and I don't know why I did this, but I was like, well, I live in Xinjiang. And they're immediately, they're like, you must be poor. It's like, well, if it's going to get me a better price on these shoes, then yeah, sure, yeah, I'm deeply poor. I mean, but like the way that Xinjiang or Chinese people know what it's like in Xinjiang is maybe the way that most people in the U.S. understand Alaska. Like it's just like this far off place that I know it's there. I know it's huge. I know it's part of our country, but outside of maybe some pictures, I don't really know anything about a person's life that lives up there. And so I have to make assumptions about, about that. And it was that way with Xinjiang a lot, where people were, as ridiculous as it sounds to say, oh, you're from Texas, you must ride a horse and wear a cowboy hat, right? Well, that's the same thing where you would say it is equally ridiculous, but still happens that people would say, oh, you're from Xinjiang, so you ride camels everywhere, and you live in desert huts or something. It's like, no,
you're happy dancing in costumes.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And part of that happens because of our own ignorance. And as you're saying right there, part of it happens because of just intentional propaganda. And I don't necessarily mean that in a super negative way, other than to just say the only thing that sometimes it's marketed about, let's say, the Uyghur people is song and dance and maybe food.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, why don't you guys just go back to singing and dancing instead of worrying about, your, your economic status or your, political representation or anything like that. And it's like, well, there's more to any person than just what clothes they wear, what type of dance they're doing, or what type of music they listen to.
For those unable to travel to Xinjiang, tracking down Uyghur food around the world is not the easiest task. I have a few places in mind, but any of your picks of where to scare some up?
That there was a guy, maybe I'll have to find and send this to you, maybe leave it in the link. He actually made it a point to go around to find as many Uyghur restaurants as he could and rate them based on how good they were. But honestly, they're few and far between. I know there are a few in California. There's like if we're talking in the U.S., not throughout China, you'll find if you just go to the Muslim quarter of any city, if there is one, you'll generally find something there.
Or near a major train or bus station often as well. But,
yeah, or near a mosque, which I guess would be exactly. But within the U.S., there's a group in Virginia of Uyghur. There's a group in Houston. And so I know of restaurants that you could try in some of those locations that I haven't tried them personally, so I don't know how good they are, but I know they're run by, Uyghur from Xinjiang, so it should be good.
Fantastic. And I hear about there's a selection in Toronto, which I haven't tried, so I'm curious. Uyghur Kebab House. So I think it's pretty easy if you get a sense of the food to tell which ones are going to be run by ethnic Chinese and which are going to be run by Uyghurs. And the Chinese ones often have many more of, say, the vegetable dishes and more Chinese influenced dishes on the menu. And if it's really Uyghur, I notice like, oh, there's only one page to the menu. It's going to be really good. But it's going to be a little more limited. Oh, I hear one by Munich train station too. Yeah, that's where I started
getting surprised me.
Getting interested in food was traveling around China and arriving at these train stations at 5 in the morning, and the only place that was open would be the Uyghur restaurant.
Exactly. Yeah. And you're right. I'm seeing this comment about the Munich train station because in Germany there's a large group. I think the largest group of Uyghur are located of the diaspora are located in Germany. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot more of those.
Oh, fantastic. And also hearing about, so the Xinjiang office, so that's every province of China has like like an internal consulate in Beijing, and they often have restaurants. So that's one way to tour the foods of China is tour these restaurants from the provincial offices.
Yep. Yeah, and they also mentioned Dapanji, which is another good one to try. It's technically not a Uyghur dish. It's a Hui dish, but it's still like it's been adopted by basically any group in Xinjiang and kind of molded to their own, specifications. But it literally translates to a big plate of chicken, da pan ji, and it's great. If you can have that with a Uyghur flatbread, kind of as a dipping into the sauce, that's so good.
For those that are concerned about some of these challenges, like we talked about permits and different regulations and that, speak to the neighboring provinces, say grasslands of Gansu or Qinghai regions that somebody a little less comfortable, maybe not with the language skills or the comfort level, would find in a red tape sense a bit easier to travel.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously you've got different levels. So Tibet would be the hardest, right to our south, where you have to have a permit and you have to go with a tour group. Xinjiang would probably be right under that, where you've got, you don't have to have a special permit. You just have to have a Chinese visa and you can get into Xinjiang, but there is a lot of restriction on movement. But what you're referencing, Qinghai obviously would be the next, probably most similar to both, because you've got, from the Tibetan standpoint, you've got a lot of Tibetan people in Qinghai. Probably the highest population of Tibetan people outside of Tibet is in Qinghai. But then you've got a lot of the natural beauty of Xinjiang and a lot of that. And I think that would be, if I were to say one place, you can go there. And you can even go camping. There's some glamping spots in Qinghai. So just to give you an idea of what's possible that you couldn't easily do in a place like Xinjiang. And it is a lot of open space. So there's not a whole lot to go see in the same regard as like Xinjiang. I could name to you, 20, 30 different spots around the province that are really worth going and seeing. Whereas in Qinghai, it's a smaller number. But I enjoy that. The Gansu province is where you'll find a lot of the Hui people that I was referencing from Xinjiang, and you're going to see a lot of their culture. So it's going to be still that Muslim, still a lot of that same type of cuisine, noodles, lamb meat, all of that stuff. A little more maybe beef that happens with the Hui cuisine. But that is something that in Gansu province, it's smaller and it's kind of this long, thin. That's if you were taking a train from Xi'an to Xinjiang, you'd spend most of your time in the Gansu province just going up, into Xinjiang. But there's a lot of really interesting places all throughout there. You mentioned Dunhuang earlier, and I would highly recommend Dunhuang as a place to go see and spend some time.
Kevin's asking about the sweet apple dish you find in Xinjiang. Would this be the basi pingwa, or am I?
That's what I'm thinking. It's like the candied apple that they'd have for dessert. Is that what he's talking about? Maybe.
I think maybe. So describe this wonderful dish.
Well, how would you describe it? I think candied would be the best way to say it. It just comes out on this plate, but the best way to eat it, like it would always be eaten, is you take it and you dip it, like usually with your chopsticks, dip it in water to kind of harden the candy shell.
Like a fritter. It's a kind of fritter that then is covered with some kind of like instant cement caramel that the water otherwise
exactly, because it comes out super hot.
And I always make the mistake that I order it and I say, don't bring it as the first thing, wait. And you can never tell a restaurant in China, wait on a dish. You cannot order it up front. You have to, because after a few minutes, it's just a rock mush pile.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. But I think that was one of the things that I learned to appreciate in Xinjiang was because there's obviously in China, there's not really this concept of a dessert, so to speak, but they would come out with a plate of fruit at the end of a meal, especially big banquet. And in Xinjiang, as we were talking about, the fruit is just amazing. And so they just come out with this massive plate of fruit that, I learned to appreciate that as a dessert because it was just so good.
Yeah, something of those heavy meals, just those tiny little fruit forks and the little slices of melon. It's incredible. I'm going to share. You have a site, Travel China Cheaper, that's a great start for people interested in the country, and it's definitely a country that it's not your relaxing Zen on the beach style vacation. So for
Mhm.
broadly China, getting started and not getting overwhelmed. What are your thoughts on people? They're not going to go on that first 2 week package tour whirlwind. They want to be traveling independent. I often suggest to people Sichuan, go to Chengdu and check that out. But what are some of your thoughts on that? Starting out and ramping up for the serious traveler.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's so many different types of travelers, but I think, one of the things that I've focused on a lot having to do with the Travel China Cheaper site, because it's a question that I get most, is mostly having to do with two things, is money and transport. Like if you can get those two things figured out pretty easily, or not easily, but if you can get those two things figured out, you're a lot better off, and just figuring out how to pay for things. Because most people who've never been to China, there's some things that for those of us that have are just kind of second nature. It's like, what?
Mhm.
Of course, that's true. So like I had one lady come back after traveling to China and basically chew me out. She's like, you didn't tell me I can't use credit cards in China,
Mm,
or like not everywhere. Obviously you can use credit cards somewhere, but definitely not in Xinjiang. I was
mm,
like, yeah, I kind of thought that was a given, but maybe not. I mean, so just understanding, okay, if you can't expect that your Visa or MasterCard is going to work everywhere, and it's
mhm,
not, then what are your options? How do you get cash,
mm.
without, like, can you go to an ATM? What are the charges? What do you need to know about all that stuff? And then same with transportation. We just had somebody ask my preferred method to get around China, and it's train, hands down. Like it is, and in some ways that is the fastest way to get around China. Like for example, from Beijing to Shanghai, a flight is only an hour and a half, 2 hours. But of course, you've also got to get to the airport an hour and a half earlier, and you've got to, find your way into the city from
And
the Pudong
3 hour
airport.
air traffic control delay.
Exactly. And on top of the fact that you have just killed an entire half of your day. Whereas you can now jump on a high-speed overnight train from Beijing to Shanghai. You leave at 8:30 p.m. and you arrive at 7 a.m. and you've had a comfortable sleep. You've saved money on a hotel, like all of these things, and it's fun. Like I thoroughly enjoy. China has probably one of the best trained systems out there. And I don't know why you wouldn't want to give it a try. We've had someone just ask if there's safety issues on trains. Like there's always, you always read, and I tell people that, you don't want to leave your belongings. Like there's not a place to lock up your belongings, so to speak. And so what happens sometimes is you'll get these travelers that have traveled with a massive suitcase,
Yeah.
and maybe the only place they can put their suitcase is at the front of the train as opposed to with them. And
Yeah.
that's when you get into a little bit of problems. So for a backpacker who's got their backpack and they're literally just, sleeping their head on their backpack, I've never had theft personally on a train. And I've never had, any problems. I'm trying to think of anything that's happened on a train for me, and rarely a delay. Trains are probably, that's another reasons why I like trains, is because a flight will get delayed almost all the time. So much to the point that Stephen, I actually, my wife and I learned to pack an overnight pair of clothing in our carry-on whenever we would fly in China, because there were too many times that a flight would get delayed and the airline would put us up in a hotel, but we wouldn't have another pair of clothing. And so we always packed just one set of clothing in
I
our
was put
carry-on.
up in one of those hotels in Urumqi for a flight delay, and I was expected
Were
to
you?
share a bed with another guy. They said it's
Yes,
2 person basis.
I know. That's another bonus of traveling with a companion, like my wife, is they would never split us. And so I never had to share a bed with another guy.
I can echo. I've never had issues on the trains, and I do. Actually, I would get the Shopi dye that red, white, and blue carry-all bag that a lot of the migrant workers, and I would just put my backpack
Yeah.
in there with some laundry on top, and no one would ever screw around
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah. So I mean, the train stations. There's somebody that's commenting about that. I get what you're saying in terms of it's not, it's still not nearly as bad as an airport.
Oh
Like
yeah.
an airport, it still takes me, a while to get through. I can get through the Shanghai train station and
Mhm.
get to, from the front, security to my gate in 15, 20 minutes. Like
Mhm.
it's not the same style of security. Most of the time it's just putting your bag through and standing up there, walking through a metal detector or something like that. Maybe that's going to change. Maybe it's going to get worse as time goes on. I hope not.
Mhm.
But I still think it's much faster because a lot of the train stations are located in the middle of the city as opposed to airports, which are sometimes an hour outside of the city. I mean,
Mhm.
Beijing's new airport is, it's a good distance away. Now, granted, you've got these transportation that'll get you there fast, but it's still a long ways away. Whereas the train station in Beijing, it's right on the subway line and
Mhm.
it's really easy to get to.
Yeah, and the so we got more. Is there a first class or the? I mean, talking about the train classes, that is. I think you have a page on your site that I can link to about the trains. So
I
in
do
the
have a China Trains page that
Mhm.
kind of goes through all that. There's also an entire chapter in the book in my Travel China Cheaper book. So these type of questions where I wrote a book as if I was talking to my family member who'd never been to China
Mhm.
and wanted to come for the first time. And it's like, here's what you should expect.
Yeah.
Yes, you can get your own berth in a Chinese train, and it has a little more space for something like a bigger piece of luggage. Or if you're a 4-person family like me and 2 boys, we can have a berth that closes a door and locks it.
Mhm.
And that's great. That is possible. But those type of things of, how do you buy tickets? Do you have to go to the train station? No, there are ticket offices all throughout the city. Can you do it online? Yes, there are ways to do that. So just those type of answers to questions. I've got it on the website, which you can link to, and
Yep,
then
I've linked there, and there's a lot that has changed. Like a lot of those train ticket offices have closed because it's all gone online, which is
yeah,
easy if you have a Chinese phone or Chinese payment. In some ways, it's gotten harder, I feel like, in the past 2 or 3 years for a foreigner to travel, and
yeah,
easier for Chinese because so much has gone online, and it's not always penetrable for foreigners to get set up with these. Alipay this year launched this virtual tour pass it's very limited, but it does allow some payment. So yeah, check out the site. I've got it in the notes. It is a country where it takes so it rewards certainly showing up with some preparation, not just
yeah.
winging it. And I will say the new satellite at I don't know what the status of the restaurants are right now, but the new Pudong Shanghai Pudong satellite terminal has a branch of one of the best. Granted, it's a chain, but a Xinjiang chain in
All
Shanghai.
right.
You can actually not only get the lamb kebabs, you can even get the roast lamb kidney kebabs.
Wow.
I mean, I was just stunned they had it there, and the plav and that. So I don't eat at too many airports, but I want to be back eating there if I can get there this year.
Nice. That's cool.
Well, thank you. We were going to talk. I think we have to get you back for part two because you've got so many tips about and a whole separate site and business around travel tech and travel security that as much as we try to tell people to use VPNs, it's you just have to wear them down and convince them. So I think we'll pause that there and bring you back for an entirely different travel tech, travel security, and Southeast Asia discussion.
Sounds good.
Thank you for joining us, Josh.
Yeah. Thank you guys.